Content warning. This episode discusses domestic homicide and violence within a family. Listener discretion is advised. It's just after 9:30 on a November night in 2010 in a quiet, comfortable suburb north of Toronto called Markham. 25-year-old Jennifer Pan is upstairs in her bedroom, TV on, phone in hand, getting ready for bed. Downstairs, her parents are pottering around the house the way parents do on an ordinary weeknight. Nothing unusual, nothing worth a second thought. And then Jennifer hears something that doesn't belong in the house. Voices she doesn't recognize. Footsteps that are too heavy, too fast, moving through rooms that are supposed to be empty of anyone but her family. Within minutes, 3 intruders will be inside that home. By the time police arrive, Jennifer's mother will be dead on the basement floor, shot at close range. Her father will be critically injured, a bullet lodged just above his eye. And Jennifer herself will be found by police exactly where she told the 911 dispatcher she'd be, tied to the banister at the top of the stairs, terrified, sobbing, apparently the lone survivor of a random, violent home invasion. For a while, that's the story police believe. A loving daughter, spared almost by accident, while her parents paid the price for a crime that had nothing to do with any of them. It would take detectives the better part of a year to work out that almost none of that was true, that the young woman tied to that banister hadn't just survived the attack. She had ordered it. This is the story of Jennifer Pan. It's a story about a family built almost entirely on appearances, and about what happened when one daughter's carefully constructed version of her own life finally collided with reality, and she decided the only way out was to have her parents killed. Part 1. A family built on expectation. To understand Jennifer Pan, you have to start with her parents, Han and Bitch Ha Pan, and the life they built for their children after arriving in Canada with almost nothing. Han and Bitch Ha had both grown up in Vietnam, and both arrived in Canada separately in 1979 as political refugees, part of a wave of migration following the Vietnam War, at a point in their lives when they had little more than the clothes they carried, and whatever resilience it takes to start again in a country where you don't speak the language and don't know a single person. They met in Canada, married, and set about building the kind of life that immigrant families in their position often describe in almost identical terms. Relentless work, careful saving, and an unwavering belief that their children's success would be the ultimate justification for everything they'd sacrificed to get there. Han worked in the auto parts manufacturing industry. Bitch Ha worked in a factory. Between them, they built a stable, solidly middle-class life in Markham, Ontario, and they poured everything they had into their 2 children, their son Felix and their daughter Jennifer, born in 1986. By every external measure, Jennifer was exactly what her parents had hoped for. She excelled at piano. She was a competitive figure skater, training for hours most days of the week. She appeared throughout her childhood and adolescence to be diligent, accomplished, and obedient, the kind of daughter other immigrant parents in the neighborhood would hold up as an example. But underneath that surface, a very different story was unfolding, and it started, in a sense, with a piece of academic dishonesty so small it's almost hard to believe how far its consequences eventually traveled. In grade 11, Jennifer was caught cheating on a math test. It's the kind of infraction that, for most families, results in a stern conversation and a docked grade. For Jennifer, it triggered something closer to total panic, because her parents' expectations of her weren't a general hope for a good life. They were specific, exacting, and largely non-negotiable. Top grades, a path toward a career in medicine or pharmacy, no boyfriends, curfews, closely monitored friendships. Bitch Ha and Han Pan, having sacrificed enormously for their children's future, expected obedience and excellence in return, and Jennifer had grown up entirely inside that framework. Rather than confess the cheating incident and face the consequences, Jennifer began to lie. And once that first lie was in place, she found, as so many people caught in the same trap discover, that maintaining it required more lies, and those lies required more still, until eventually an entire second version of her academic life had to be constructed and maintained essentially full-time, alongside her real one. Part 2. The double life over the following years, that fabrication grew into something extraordinary in scale. Jennifer told her parents she was on track to attend university to study pharmacology, one of the most respected, most secure professional paths a child of ambitious immigrant parents could pursue. She told them she was enrolled, attending classes, doing well. She produced, when needed, evidence to support all of it. Fabricated report cards, a forged university acceptance letter, even a fake part-time job that she claimed to be working at a hospital pharmacy, complete with a schedule, a uniform, and, remarkably, a fabricated boss whose voice Jennifer herself would sometimes imitate over the phone to keep the story airtight. In reality, Jennifer never graduated high school in the way she told her parents she had, and she never attended the university program she claimed to be enrolled in. For years, by the time of the murder, investigators would establish it had been going on for the better part of a decade. She left the house every day, dressed for a life she wasn't actually living, and simply had nowhere in particular to be. Running parallel to this academic fiction was a second deception, one that would ultimately prove just as consequential: Jennifer's relationship with a young man named Daniel Wang. Jennifer and Daniel had been involved, on and off, since high school, a relationship her parents strongly disapproved of, partly because Daniel didn't fit the profile of partner they'd envisioned for their daughter, and partly because, over time, he became increasingly entangled in drug dealing. Rather than end the relationship or risk her parents' reaction to it continuing, Jennifer kept it secret for years, weaving it into the same web of lies that was already covering her education. When her parents did eventually discover the relationship and forbade her from continuing it, Jennifer didn't stop seeing Daniel. She simply hid it more carefully, to the point of using a friend's home as a base to continue the relationship behind her parents' backs, telling her father she was staying over for entirely innocent reasons. It's worth pausing here, because this is really the emotional core of the entire case. For the better part of a decade, Jennifer Pan lived two completely separate lives simultaneously. One life existed only for her parents, dutiful, high-achieving, moving steadily toward the future they had planned for her since she was small. The other life was the one she was actually living, directionless, professionally unmoored, romantically involved with someone her parents had explicitly forbidden. Holding both of those lives together, without either one ever colliding with the other, required a level of sustained deception that's genuinely difficult to comprehend. And it could only ever last as long as her parents never asked the wrong question at the wrong time. Part 3. The lies start to collapse. By 2010, the architecture Jennifer had spent nearly a decade building was becoming almost impossible to maintain. Her relationship with Daniel Wang had deteriorated by this point. The two were no longer officially together, though they remained in contact, and Daniel would go on to play a central role in what came next. Meanwhile, the fictional university career Jennifer had constructed was, by its nature, a story with an expiration date. Fake report cards can only be produced for so many years before someone, a relative, a family friend, an actual university, asks a question that has no good answer. Her parents began to grow suspicious. And as the walls of the fiction started closing in, the relationship between Jennifer and her father in particular grew increasingly strained. Han Pan, by multiple accounts including his own later testimony, was a strict, controlling presence in the household. The kind of father who exercised close oversight over his daughter's life well into her 20s, restricting her movements, her phone use, her friendships. Whatever sympathy that Strictness might deserve as a product of his own background and his hopes for his daughter, it also meant that Jennifer, approaching her mid-20s, was living under a level of parental control usually associated with a much younger teenager. Control she had spent years trying to root around rather than confront directly. Sometime in 2010, the truth about Jennifer's education finally began to surface. And with her carefully maintained cover story unraveling, and her father's control over her life tightening rather than loosening in response, Jennifer arrived at a conclusion that would come to define the rest of her life and end her mother's. That there was no way out of this situation that didn't involve her parents no longer being in a position to control her. What she settled on wasn't confrontation, and it wasn't simply running away. It was murder carried out by other people, on her behalf, disguised as a random home invasion, with Jennifer herself positioned as a victim rather than the architect. Part 4. The plot. Jennifer turned to Daniel Wang to help her arrange it. Whatever the state of their romantic relationship by that point, Daniel had connections through his drug dealing to people who, for the right price, would carry out violence for hire. Through Daniel and an associate named Lenford Crawford, Jennifer's plan was passed along to two men who would ultimately enter her family's home on the night of the attack, David Milvaganam and a third accomplice. The plan, as it was eventually reconstructed by investigators and prosecutors, was for these men to enter the Pan home, kill Han Pan, and leave Jennifer physically unharmed, but staged to look like a victim, tied up, terrified, positioned to tell police a convincing story about a break-in gone wrong. Jennifer would arrange to leave a door unlocked so the men could get inside without any sign of forced entry, and would otherwise make herself scarce or vulnerable looking at the right moment. What's crucial, and what would later become the single most contested detail in the entire legal saga of this case, is what the plan was supposed to be regarding Jennifer's mother, Bitch Ha. According to the account that would eventually be accepted in court years later, Jennifer's plan was centered on her father. But she knew, or at minimum should have known, that her mother could very plausibly be in the house at the same time the plan was carried out, and she proceeded regardless. On the night of November 8, 2010, that plan was put into motion. Part 5. The night of the attack at around 9:30 p.m., three men entered the Pan family home. Jennifer would later tell police, in the account she gave in the immediate aftermath, that she heard unfamiliar voices and heavy footsteps from her bedroom, and that when she went to investigate, she was confronted, restrained, and forced downstairs at gunpoint along with her parents. What followed was harrowing by any measure, regardless of who had set it in motion. The intruders demanded money. Han Pan told them where to find what cash was in the house, including roughly $1,100 in US currency left over from a family trip. According to the account given afterward, Jennifer, still apparently hoping the ordeal might end without violence, directed the men toward additional cash her mother had hidden, hoping it would be enough to satisfy them and bring the situation to an end. It wasn't. The men separated the family. Jennifer was tied to the banister at the top of the stairs, the same position in which police would find her hours later. Downstairs, in the basement, her mother Bitch Ha Pan was shot. She died there. Her father, Han Pan, was shot in the head at close range, but survived, a survival that owed as much to sheer chance as to anything else, given the severity of the injury. When police and paramedics arrived, they found the scene exactly as Jennifer had described it in her 911 call. Herself restrained at the top of the stairs, her mother dead, her father gravely wounded. For a period, it was treated, understandably, as precisely what it appeared to be, a random, violent home invasion that had gone catastrophically wrong, targeting a family who had simply had the terrible misfortune of being home. Part 6. The investigation in the days that followed homicide detectives and members of the wider community responded to the case the way any community does after a seemingly random act of extreme violence lands on an ordinary street, with fear and with a scramble for information. Detectives canvassed close to 400 homes in the surrounding neighborhood, looking for anything, a car, a sound, a stranger that might explain what had happened. Home security companies, capitalizing on the fear rippling through the suburb, went door to door in the days after, selling camera systems to residents suddenly newly aware of how vulnerable their own homes might be. But almost from the beginning, some of the detectives working the case felt something didn't sit right. Statistically, home invasions carried out by complete strangers with no connection whatsoever to the victims are relatively rare. The overwhelming majority of homicides in Canada, as in most countries, are committed by someone the victim knows. A partner, a family member, an acquaintance. That statistical backdrop alone wasn't proof of anything, but it shaped how carefully investigators scrutinized every detail of Jennifer's account. And there were details that didn't add up. Investigators noted inconsistencies in aspects of Jennifer's story about the night of the attack, small discrepancies in timing and sequence that individually might have meant nothing, but that collectively began to raise questions. Digging into Jennifer's background, detectives also started to uncover threads of the double life she'd been maintaining for years. The fabricated university career, the hidden relationship with Daniel Wang, a young man with a known history of drug offenses. The investigation split, for a time, into two camps. Some detectives continued to treat the case as a random, tragic act of violence against an unlucky family. Others became increasingly convinced that the picture Jennifer had painted of herself, an innocent daughter caught up in a stranger's crime, didn't match the person emerging from the interviews, the phone records, and the growing list of contradictions in her own story. Jennifer was interviewed multiple times over the following months. Each time, investigators pressed harder on the gaps in her account. And across a series of these interviews, conducted with the kind of patient, incremental pressure that homicide investigators are trained to apply, Jennifer's story began, slowly, to change. In her third formal interview with investigators, Jennifer Pan finally admitted what she had spent months denying, that she had been the one to set the attack in motion. She maintained, in that admission and for years afterward, that the plan had never been for her mother to be harmed, that Bitch Ha's death was a consequence she hadn't intended, even if she'd been the one who set everything in motion that made it possible. Part 7. Arrest and trial. Jennifer Pan was arrested and charged with first-degree murder in the death of her mother and attempted murder in the shooting of her father. Charged alongside her were Daniel Wang, Lenford Crawford, and David Milvaganam, the men prosecutors alleged had helped organize and carry out the attack on her behalf. The trial, which began in 2014, drew intense media attention across Canada, not least because of how completely it inverted the initial public understanding of the case. The same young woman who had briefly been mourned as a survivor, a daughter who'd watched her mother die and narrowly escaped the same fate herself, was now standing trial as the person prosecutors said had orchestrated the entire attack. The Crown's case leaned heavily on the story of Jennifer's years-long deception, the fabricated academic career, the forged documents, the secret relationship with Daniel Wang, and the argument that by 2010, Jennifer had run out of road, facing the imminent collapse of a decade-long fiction and a father whose control over her life showed no sign of loosening. Prosecutors framed the murder plot as Jennifer's solution to that impossible bind, a way to remove her parents' control over her life permanently, while positioning herself as a grieving victim rather than a suspect. Jennifer's defense argued a different version of events, that she had not orchestrated her mother's death, that she herself had been more victim than architect on the night in question, and that the Crown's case relied too heavily on circumstantial inference stitched together from her admittedly extensive history of lying to her parents about unrelated matters. The jury didn't accept that defense. In December 2014, after 4 days of deliberation, Jennifer Pan was found guilty of first-degree murder in the death of her mother and guilty of attempted murder in the shooting of her father. Daniel Wang, Lenford Crawford, and David Milvaganam were found guilty on the same charges. The first-degree murder conviction carried an automatic life sentence, with no possibility of parole for 25 years. In the courtroom, as the verdict was read, Jennifer dropped her head and sat in silence. She began sobbing only once the judge set a date for sentencing. Part 8. The victim impact Han Pan did not appear in court for his daughter's sentencing. Instead, he submitted a written statement, one that has become, in the years since, one of the most quoted and most devastating pieces of testimony connected to the case. "When I lost my wife, I lost my daughter at the same time," he wrote. It's a single sentence that captures something almost impossible to fully convey through the mechanics of a criminal trial. That Han Pan didn't just lose Bich Ha that night in the basement of his own home. He lost his daughter too, not to a bullet, but to the discovery that the young woman he had raised, the one whose future he and his wife had structured their entire immigrant lives around securing, had ultimately decided that the surest way out of their control was to have them killed. He closed his statement with something that reads less like the fury a jury might expect from a victim, and more like a father still, somehow, holding out hope for the daughter he'd lost twice over. "I hope my daughter Jennifer thinks about what happened to her family and can become a good, honest person someday," he wrote. The family also requested, and was granted, a non-communication order, a formal legal instrument ensuring that Jennifer would have no contact with her father or her brother, Felix, going forward. Whatever bond had existed inside that Markham home before November 2010, the courts made it, from that point on, a legal impossibility for it to continue. Part 9. The appeals, and a case that refused to stay closed for most true crime cases. The story would end there. Verdict delivered, sentence handed down, a family left to grieve as best it can. But the Jennifer Pan case didn't end in 2014. It has continued to move through the Canadian legal system for more than a decade since, and the developments in that time have been significant enough that they change, in real and material ways, how this case is understood today. Jennifer and her co-accused appealed their convictions, and in May 2023, the Court of Appeal for Ontario delivered a ruling that reopened the entire case. The appellate court found that the trial judge had made an error in how the jury was instructed regarding the charge related to Jennifer's mother. Specifically, that jurors should have been permitted to consider a broader range of possible verdicts, including second-degree murder or manslaughter, rather than being confined effectively to a binary choice between first-degree murder and acquittal. The Court of Appeal reasoned that there was a genuine, realistic possibility a jury could have concluded Jennifer was responsible for her mother's death, without having specifically planned, and intended it the level required for a first-degree murder conviction, and that not giving the jury that option was a legal error significant enough to require a new trial. Notably, the Court of Appeal left Jennifer's attempted murder conviction relating to her father untouched. That conviction stood. The Crown appealed that decision to the Supreme Court of Canada, seeking to have the original murder convictions reinstated. In 2025, in a 7-2 decision, the Supreme Court's majority upheld the Court of Appeal's ruling, confirming that Jennifer Pan, Daniel Wang, Lenford Crawford, and David Milvaganam were entitled to a new trial on the first-degree murder charge relating to Bich Ha Pan's death. That new trial never fully played out in front of a jury. Instead, with a retrial looming, Jennifer Pan entered a guilty plea not to first-degree murder, but to the lesser charge of manslaughter in relation to her mother's death. As part of the agreed statement of facts presented to the court, it was accepted that Jennifer had not specifically planned to have her mother killed, but that, having arranged for her father to be killed, she knew, or ought reasonably to have known, that her mother could well be present in the house when that plan was carried out, and she proceeded regardless. Following that plea, Jennifer Pan received a life sentence for manslaughter, but, critically, one that makes her eligible for parole, unlike the original first-degree murder conviction, which would have kept her ineligible for 25 years. It's a legal outcome that sits in an uneasy middle ground. Neither the full exoneration her defense had originally sought, nor the sentence originally handed down by the 2014 jury. Part 10, where things stand more than 15 years on from the night 3 men walked into a house in Markham. The case of Jennifer Pan remains, in a very real legal sense, unresolved in ways most true crime cases never are. The attempted murder conviction relating to her father has stood since 2014 and was never disturbed by any appeal. The conviction relating to her mother's death has been through a full legal reversal, a Supreme Court ruling, and ultimately a renegotiated plea that reduces both the charge and the practical length of time Jennifer will spend behind bars before becoming eligible for release. Jennifer has, at various points throughout this process, continued to maintain that she was never the architect of her mother's death in the way the original jury concluded, a position her legal team has continued to press through appeal after appeal. Her father and brother, under the non-communication order secured after the original trial, have had no contact with her since. The case became the subject of a Netflix documentary, What Jennifer Did, released in 2024, which reintroduced the story to a global audience largely unfamiliar with the original 2014 trial, an audience that, in many cases, encountered the story for the first time already aware, thanks to the documentary's release coinciding almost exactly with news of the pending retrial, that Jennifer's case was still very much unresolved. There's something particularly unsettling about this case that doesn't come from the violence itself, as brutal as that violence was, but from how ordinary everything underneath it looks, right up until the moment it doesn't. 2 parents who came to a new country with almost nothing, and who built, through years of hard, unglamorous work, a stable, comfortable life for their children. A daughter who, from the outside, appeared to be everything they'd hoped for: accomplished, disciplined, dutiful. And underneath all of it, a decade-long fiction so total that the young woman living it may have, at some point, lost track of exactly which version of her life was the real one. The one where she was a pharmacology student with a bright, secure future, or the one where none of that had ever actually been true, and the walls were finally, irreversibly, closing in. Whatever Jennifer Pan's exact intentions were on the night of November 8, 2010, whether she plotted specifically for her mother to die, or simply set in motion a chain of events reckless enough that her mother's death became a foreseeable, accepted possibility, the outcome was the same. Bichha Pan, a woman who spent decades working to give her children a life she never had, was shot dead in the basement of her own home by people her daughter had brought into that house. Han Pan survived, but by his own account, in the most painful sentence to come out of this entire case, he lost his wife and his daughter on exactly the same night. One to a bullet, and the other to a truth he never saw coming, from a child he had spent his whole life trying to protect. This has been the case of Jennifer Pan. Thank you for listening.